My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old. My story starts a long time ago, back when I was just a teenager, and things were much simpler. But life doesn't always stay that way, does it? Things changed for me after my mother passed away. I was only 15 then, and it felt like the world had been ripped out from under me. After my mother's death, my father remarried. At first, I thought it would be okay. I thought I would get used to it. But as time passed, I could see the change in my father. It wasn't just his new wife, Linda, who had taken over everything. He started treating me differently too. One day, everything came to a head. My father sat me down in the living room. He looked at me with those tired eyes, and I knew something wasn't right. "Sarah," he said softly, "you're a smart girl. You can take care of yourself. But your brother needs this more than you." I blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" He paused and then spoke again. "The inheritance. I'm giving it to Tom, your stepbrother. He needs it to get ahead in life. He's been working hard, and he has plans. You work hard too, but it's time for you to make your own way." I felt a fire grow in my chest. My stepbrother, Tom? He had always been spoiled, always got what he wanted, and now my father was handing him everything? The money, the house, the business. It was all supposed to go to me. I was his daughter, after all. But there he was, saying that Tom needed it more than I did. I stood up, my hands trembling. "This isn't right," I shouted. "Why does he get everything? What about me?" My father's face hardened. "You'll be fine, Sarah. I'm sure you'll figure it out." I couldn't believe it. The anger, the betrayal. It felt like my heart was shattering. I had lost my mother, and now I felt like I was losing my father too. Without saying another word, I grabbed my things and stormed out of the house. I didn't care where I went, as long as it wasn't there. I didn't look back. I had no other choice but to leave. It was the only way to escape the anger and the disappointment. Years went by, and I found my own way. I worked hard, built a life for myself. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't poor either. I started my own business, found a small apartment in the city, and made a name for myself. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Then one day, out of the blue, I received a message. It was from my father. He wanted to meet. I didn't know what to think. I hadn't spoken to him in years, and the thought of seeing him again filled me with so many mixed emotions. Part of me wanted to scream at him for what he had done, but another part of me was curious. What did he want now? Why had he reached out after all this time? I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop. When I walked in, I saw him right away. He looked older, tired, like time had finally caught up with him. But when he saw me, his face changed. His eyes widened, and he stood up so fast that his chair scraped the floor. It felt like the whole world stopped for a moment. I hadn't seen him in years, but here he was, staring at me as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And I couldn't blame him. I had changed too. I had come a long way since I walked out of that house all those years ago. I had worked hard to make something of myself. I had been driving a luxury car, something I never thought I would own. But here I was, in front of my father, someone I hadn't seen in years, someone who had given everything away to my stepbrother. He stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, unable to speak. It was clear that he didn't recognize me at first. The girl he had known, the one who had left, was now standing in front of him, a completely different person. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice shaking. I nodded, but I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what to say. My anger was still there, but it wasn't the overwhelming fire it had been before. I was calm, but inside, everything was still a little broken. He blinked, trying to gather his thoughts. "You've changed. You've done well for yourself." I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I just looked at him. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. "So, what is it you want?" I finally asked, crossing my arms. I couldn't help myself. The bitterness was still there, even if I had worked hard to move on. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. I know I made a mistake," he said, his voice low. "I should have given you what was yours. I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say to that. "Sorry?" I repeated. "That's all you have to say?" I know it's not enough. But Sarah, I never meant to hurt you. I thought Tom needed it more. Tom, I muttered, shaking my head. Tom always gets everything. And I was supposed to be fine with that. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just looked down at his hands. I was wrong, he admitted quietly. I was wrong to let him take everything. I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to yell, to tell him all the things I had been holding inside for years. But another part of me just wanted to leave it all behind. I didn't need his apology now. I had moved on, and there was no going back. But then something strange happened. He stood up again, this time with a sense of urgency. Sarah, I've seen the things you've done. You've built yourself into someone strong, someone successful. I admire that. And I don't want to lose you again. If I could go back and do it all over, I would. But I can't. All I can do now is try to make things right. I stared at him, unsure of what to say. It had been so long since we had been close, and the years had done something to both of us. There was a distance now, a gap that couldn't easily be bridged. Still, I wasn't sure what to do next. I hadn't expected this conversation. I hadn't expected to see him again. I sighed. I don't know if things can ever go back to the way they were, I said quietly. But I've made my peace with it. He nodded slowly, as if he understood. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. I always have been. Those words hit me harder than I expected. But they didn't change anything. I had moved on. I had built my own life, my own future. And no matter how hard my father tried to make things right, I wasn't going to let the past drag me down. And that was it. That was the moment we finally met again, after all those years. My father, standing in front of me, looking like a man who had lost everything, and me, a woman who had built everything from scratch. He had come back into my life, but I wasn't sure if that meant anything anymore. I had done it on my own. And now, I was free after that day. Things didn't change much between my father and me. I still kept my distance, not out of anger, but because I had learned to be independent. I was still focused on my own life, my business, and the future I had been working so hard for. My father's apology was not enough to undo the years of neglect, the years of feeling forgotten and pushed aside for someone else. It had been a few weeks since that meeting, and I still found myself thinking about it. Sometimes I'd wonder if I should have been more forgiving, but then I'd remind myself of everything I had built. I had made it without him. I had learned how to live without his support or approval. One evening, after a long day at work, I was driving home when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Curiosity gnawed at me as I pulled over to the side of the road to read it. Sarah, it's Dad. Can we talk again? I think you should know something. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling the tension rise in my chest. What else could he possibly have to say? I had already heard his apology. Was he going to ask for more of my forgiveness, or was there something else on his mind? I didn't reply immediately. I put the phone down and started driving again, but the thought of his message lingered in my mind. The frustration, the feeling of being abandoned, was still fresh, and I wasn't sure I was ready to open up to him again. But I also realized that if I didn't respond, I would never know what he really wanted to say. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone. Finally, I typed out a reply. What is it you want to tell me? His response came almost instantly. I've been keeping something from you, and I think it's time you knew. That was it. My heart skipped a beat. What could it be? What secret had he been hiding all these years? My curiosity got the best of me, and I set up a meeting for the following day. I agreed to meet him at a park, a neutral place where we could talk without too much pressure. The next day, I arrived early, my mind racing. What could be so important that he needed to tell me after all this time? When my father showed up, he looked nervous. His eyes darted around, and he kept wringing his hands, like he wasn't sure how to begin. I watched him for a moment, unsure of what to say. He finally spoke, his voice quiet. Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about the past. I've been thinking about what I did to you, and I know I can't change it. But there's something I have to tell you. I waited, not interrupting him. He was struggling to find the right words, and I could tell this was harder for him than it had been before. I didn't give Tom the inheritance because he needed it. I gave it to him because your mother had a plan and she wanted him to take over the family business. I should have told you that, but I didn't want to make you feel like you weren't enough. I thought it would hurt you even more, but I was wrong. I should have been honest with you from the start. My mind was spinning. This was the truth I had never known. It wasn't that Tom deserved it more. It was that my mother had already planned for him to have it all along. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, confusion. All of these feelings flooded me at once, and I wasn't sure how to handle them. I had spent so many years feeling betrayed by my father, by Tom, by everything. And now the reason behind it was finally out in the open. I had no idea, I whispered. All these years I thought it was just because you thought I didn't need it. You told me to work hard for myself, and I did. But I never knew this. I should have told you sooner, he said softly. I didn't want to hurt you, but I did. I'm sorry. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle in. The bitterness I had felt for so long started to fade, but there was still a part of me that couldn't forget. The years of silence, of being pushed aside, didn't disappear just because the truth had come out. I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad, I finally said. But I'm glad you told me. I wish I had known the truth sooner. He nodded, as if he had expected that response. I understand. I can't change what happened. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I always have been. There was something in his voice that felt different this time. It wasn't just an apology, it was a real attempt to make things right. But as much as I wanted to believe him, I couldn't just forget everything that had happened. The years of pain and disappointment couldn't be erased with a few words. We talked for a while longer, but by the end of our conversation, I knew that this was the closure I needed. It didn't fix everything, but it gave me a chance to understand. My father had made mistakes, but he had finally owned up to them. As we parted ways that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of the past hadn't completely lifted, but it had shifted. I wasn't sure where this new relationship with my father would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could move forward. And then, something unexpected happened. As I walked to my car, ready to leave the park and go back to my life, I saw him standing there.
Tom.
My stepbrother. I froze, unsure of what to do. We hadn't spoken in years. The last time I saw him, he was still the same spoiled person who had taken everything from me without a second thought. But now, he was standing there, looking at me as if he hadn't expected to see me again. Sarah, he said, his voice hesitant. I didn't know you'd be here. Dad mentioned you came to talk. I nodded, not sure what to say to him. Tom had always been the golden child in my father's eyes, and the tension between us had never been resolved. But now, as I stood there, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to fix things between us, or if we were both just too broken to ever have a real relationship. I'm not here for you, Tom, I said quietly. I'm here for myself. And I'm done looking back. He didn't reply. He just stood there, watching me with a strange expression on his face, before turning and walking away. I watched him leave, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. I had closed the chapter on that part of my life. The past was gone, and I was finally free to write my own future.